The Kremlin's oil rear is starting to crack. The blow may come not from Europe at all. India is turning away from the Kremlin and reaching out to Ukraine. The volume of Russian oil is shrinking, and Saudi Arabia is taking the lead. Will Moscow lose its main source of foreign currency? The billions that fueled the budget and the war may be at risk. Pressure from Washington, technical shutdowns at refineries, new trade agreements. Is this already the beginning of a major shift? And while India maneuvers, Beijing makes an unexpected diplomatic move. There are signals of a new level of dialogue. Is the noose tightening around the Kremlin even now? Its biggest partners are starting to play their own game. All this coming up in just a moment. Don't miss it. Hello, I'm Solomia Dolik. This is Ukraine Today and the latest events. India strikes at Putin's finances. A battle is unfolding on the oil market that could hit the Kremlin just as hard. And this time the blow may come from Asia. India, a country that after 2022 essentially became the financial backbone of Russia's oil industry, is beginning to change course. According to Bloomberg, in February, New Delhi may import over 1 million barrels of Saudi oil per day. This is the highest level since 2019. And this almost puts Saudi Arabia on par with Russia in the Indian market. Why is this important? After the invasion of Ukraine, Moscow lost the European market. But it was saved by major buyers in Asia, primarily India. The oil was sold at a discount. Volumes grew rapidly. At its peak, up to 2 million barrels per day. That's billions of dollars every month. This is what fills the budget. In other words, it funds the war. But now the situation is changing dramatically. According to estimates from an analytical company, as early as March, imports of Russian oil could drop to 800,000 or even 1 million barrels per day. And although Russia can still formally maintain its lead with a figure of about 1.2 million barrels, the trend is clear. The gap is narrowing. What is behind this? The strengthening of diplomatic pressure from Washington, President Donald Trump's loud statement that India had allegedly agreed to reduce its purchases of Russian oil as part of trade agreements, and the maintenance of the Nayara Energy Limited refinery, which is critically dependent on Russian crude. And here, the main point is not the numbers for a single month, but the signal. If India begins to systematically reduce its purchases, Moscow will lose one of its key sales channels, which had compensated for the European sanctions. For the Kremlin, this means lower foreign currency revenues, a larger budget deficit, increased dependence on China, and a weakening of its position in the global market. And for Saudi Arabia, this is a chance to regain strategic influence in one of the most dynamic energy markets on the planet. The world is gradually closing the oil chapter. And if this trend continues, Russia's oil rear may begin to crack. The battle for survival continues. Doctors have already done the impossible to help the severely wounded hero, but ahead lies not just recovery, but a series of complex surgeries. You can find all the details on how to help our defender in the description below the video. And while India is reconsidering its oil priorities, another giant of world politics is coming to the forefront. China is turning away from Russia and extending a hand to Ukraine. If earlier Moscow counted on Asia as its strategic rear, now even there, things are not so clear-cut. After the signals from New Delhi, attention shifts to Beijing. And here comes a diplomatic move that could have far-reaching consequences. Ukraine and China are already preparing reciprocal visits following the meeting of their foreign ministers in Munich. The head of Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiga, held a separate conversation with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the dialogue was substantive and productive, and it will continue. The spokesperson for Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Heor Hitiki, reported this during a briefing in Kyiv.
Contacts will continue. We exchanged invitations to make visits. Moreover, this was not just a protocol gesture in which the minister invited the Chinese minister to visit Ukraine. And we received an invitation from the Chinese minister to visit the PRC. The dates will be coordinated. And
this is already more than just diplomatic courtesy. In Kyiv, it was stated directly that they are interested in continuing the dialogue at the highest level between the leaders of the states.
Without a doubt, we are interested in continuing contact, a dialogue at the highest level between the leaders of our countries.
Another extremely important point was made during the briefing.
China has significant influence over Moscow, and China is indeed capable of accelerating the end of the war from the Russian side.
Moreover, a phrase was voiced that could become a marker of a new geopolitical reality.
Moreover, I am convinced that today, real political agency lies in Beijing, not in Moscow.
What does this mean? China is currently Russia's key economic partner. China is the largest buyer of Russian energy resources. China is a country without which Moscow cannot feel confident on the global stage. And if Beijing intensifies contact with Kyiv, that's a signal. The geopolitical expert is making a move. And does the room for maneuver shrink for the Kremlin when even its biggest partners are playing their own game? Putin's oil vein has finally been tapped out, and the Kremlin is resorting to extremes. A complete crisis turnaround. The bunker signs the deal and nervously counts the losses. Record discounts for China and India. A dead end in its purest form. While the world watches, the Russian economy is taking a hit from which it will not easily recover. Is a knockout all that's left? Don't miss the first details coming up next. Russia has started selling oil at a loss due to record discounts for China and India. Companies are massively refusing Russian oil due to sanctions. In order not to shut down production, they have to agree to any terms.
What policy has Russia adopted, realizing that today India says it will refuse so that China doesn't leave? They say, all right, we'll give you discounts. So yes, this is an option that works, but at the same time, I want to remind you that when you offer discounts, you need to remember your production costs. In
November, the US imposed sanctions on Russian oil and its price plummeted, even despite statements from Russian officials claiming that this was impossible.
Let's imagine that tomorrow everything is shut down. Our gas, oil, and so on. But the global economy wouldn't withstand such a shutdown. These are large-scale
sanctions on oil. We're talking about two of the largest oil companies, some of the biggest in the world. They are heavily involved in oil extraction, and I hope this will push Putin to become more reasonable.
Their prices even reach $36 to $37 per barrel. So for Russia, this is a very unpleasant situation for the simple reason that the value of Russian oil is estimated in the range of $45 to $50 per barrel. When you trade below that figure, you're trading at a loss.
After that, India stated that they could easily get by without Russian oil. India
has diversified its sources of supply, and we have gone from about 27 countries from which we bought oil to about 40 countries now. But moreover, if the question arises whether to buy from source 1 or source 2, we have made it clear from the very beginning that we will buy wherever necessary. Well,
and as for Xi Jinping, although he promised to continue buying oil, Chinese companies are also in no hurry to violate the sanctions.
Despite the turbulence in the international environment, China and Russia will remain committed to the spirit of everlasting good neighborliness, comprehensive strategic interaction, and mutually beneficial cooperation.
The Russian dictator continues to lie, claiming that the situation is stable and that they are forcing oil companies to take budget money to save them from bankruptcy.
And they'll shut down our oil. Well, at least they'll shut it down somehow. Although they won't be able to do it. It's simply impossible to do that as of today. I don't think this will have any significant impact on us. I mean, there have already been hundreds, thousands of sanctions imposed, and we are where we are, as I've already said. Last year, our economy grew by 4.3%.
Right now, Russia is trading oil at a loss, hoping that the situation will improve. But if this hope doesn't come true, then next year we might, to our surprise, hear about the bankruptcy of oil companies in Russia.
It turns out that Russia's budget money is going toward the war to save the sanctioned assets of Putin's inner circle from bankruptcy, but definitely not to make the lives of ordinary citizens more prosperous and secure. Urgent. Putin is starting a war in space. The first details that the whole world is discussing. Russian engineers are launching machines capable of destroying Starlink satellites. Elon Musk is getting nervous. The dictator gives a sharp order to cut everything off on his territory. China is entering the war harshly. Xi Jinping bursts in and demonstrates power. Ultimately, what could be the consequences of a fierce battle right in space? More on this in the report coming up. So,
how do you like that, Elon Musk? Russia is developing weapons to destroy Starlink satellites in space. This was reported by the Associated Press, citing sources in NATO.
Two intelligence agencies from NATO countries suspect that Russia is developing a new anti-satellite weapon designed to target Elon Musk's Starlink satellite constellation, with destructive orbital clouds of debris aiming to limit the West's advantage in space, which has helped Ukraine on the battlefield.
Warfare in space and the destruction of American satellites is one of Putin's scare tactics, which the Russian dictator has used almost since the very beginning of the war.
Components of civilian infrastructure in space provided to Ukraine for military purposes may become a legitimate target for a corresponding strike by the Russian Foreign Ministry.
Earlier, at the beginning of 2024, the work of Russian engineers on space weaponry caused concern for the previous American administration. At that time, the discussion was about a nuclear explosion in space, as well as S-500 systems capable of destroying missiles and spacecraft in near-Earth orbits.
US President Joe Biden ordered to establish contact with Moscow. This is related to the anti-satellite capabilities that Russia is developing.
It is reported that the principle of operation of the new Russian weapon involves scattering hundreds of thousands of high-density spherical elements into Starlink's orbit, which are intended to disable several of Musk's satellites at once. However, military experts have a number of questions about such a weapon.
Starlink's orbits are located at an altitude of about 550 kilometers. That's 340 miles above the planet. And it's quite noteworthy that the Chinese space station Tiangong and the International Space Station of the occupying countries operate at lower orbits.
Essentially, without damaging their own and Chinese satellites, the Russians can't reach the Starlinks. Moreover, the operating principle and distribution of the satellites is such that if one is destroyed, the signal quickly switches to another.
As things stand at this very moment, there are already about 10,000 active and operational Starlink satellites launched into orbit. That is to say, it is virtually and practically impossible for any force to physically neutralize or disable the entire massive number of Starlink satellites currently in space.
At the same time, we cannot underestimate the threat of a potential struggle by the armies of evil countries against Western satellites. After all, alongside Russia, China is also developing its own means to combat space-based communication and internet sources.
We have carefully reviewed your proposals.
At the end of November, Chinese scientists modeled a scenario for the large-scale neutralization of the Starlink satellite network in the Taiwan region. According to their calculations, creating an electromagnetic shield over the entire territory of the island would require about 1,000 drones equipped with special devices to jam communications.
It happened again. China has once again dealt a harsh blow to Russia. A political knockout of unprecedented force. The US has given the signal. Trump and Xi Jinping have agreed on everything behind closed doors. Russian influence in Central Asia is on the decline. China is entering the game for dominance. You have to see this. Russia is left in the shadows. All exits are blocked. What will be the next move of the Middle Kingdom? Find out in just a moment. Don't miss it. China and Russia, who are they really? Allies or partners of convenience?
In a public setting, for everyone to see.
Beijing talks about partnership, but in reality it is reducing its dependence on Moscow and increasing control over its territories. These are
situational partners. China benefits from the raw material side of the Russian Federation, while the Russian Federation needs China's technological side. Moreover, Putin is ready to carry out specific tasks for both China and the countries of the global south in their confrontation with the American-centered world. And if Russia is ready to keep banging its head against this wall, using its own head and not something else, then I think China won't mind. At the same time,
China still hasn't condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Everyone talks about peace, but China does not call Moscow an aggressor and continues economic cooperation. We
perfectly understand that the weaker the Russian Federation is, the more comfortable it is for China. Because Russia has fewer and fewer arguments for an equal dialogue. That's why everything that's happening is happening now. In this Confucian style, if you will, where China is ready to watch, then everything that is happening is within the framework of China's strategic planning and strategic interests. And
what do the United States think about this?
Do you want China to put pressure on Russia to make it stop the war? I would like China to help us with the issue of Russia. We have imposed very serious sanctions against Russia. I think the sanctions really bite. They are very tough. But I would like China to help us. As you know, I have a very good relationship with Chairman Xi. Truly good.
And whether the US can or will want to put pressure on China in this matter is no less important. After all, the next meeting of the heads of state could take place as early as the beginning of next year.
No, that's not the issue. Why? This is because when truly constructive and productive meetings are being held between the United States and the People's Republic of China, then the difficult question of one side attempting to put undue pressure on the other simply does not arise at all. It is precisely about finding a way to balance these complex and competing interests. But having said that,
convincing China to help resolve the war is, oddly enough, not the job of the US, but of Ukraine. And this process has already begun.
could you tell me exactly where the first deputy foreign minister of Ukraine is currently located at this very moment? In China. And literally today, a joint photo with the US ambassador to China was already published. So, with a high probability, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ukrainian diplomats will now be establishing cooperation with China through the United States.
A telling point is the economy. In China, demand for oil is decreasing, which is causing prices to fall below the comfortable level for the Russian budget. Beijing is not trying to support the market for Moscow's sake. It acts solely in its own interests.
Now China is increasingly taking underground, well, essentially monopolistic control over the Russian Federation. Slowly but surely, because it's one thing to impose certain political decisions, and quite another when the Russian Federation as a whole, and above all, its military-industrial complex, becomes completely dependent on China, on chips, on equipment, and so on. That is why, in fact, through the absorption of Russia and its economy, China is completely absorbing Russia itself.
At the same time, China is strengthening its influence in Central Asia. Investment, transportation, energy, all of this is pushing Russia out of a region that the Kremlin had considered its own for decades.
The Russian Federation can no longer escape from China. It is already in the position of a junior partner, and China can now speak to the Russian Federation from a position of strength and essentially issue ultimatums. But internally, not publicly. Of course, everything looks fine in public with the red carpets, but believe me, the conversations between them are far from pleasant.
And without a single shot, China is taking away Russian territories.
And the Chinese have long been saying that Baikal is ours. At this rate, soon they'll be saying that Crimea is ours.
In the eastern regions, the share of Chinese business is growing. Companies are coming in, entrepreneurs are relocating, and an economic and demographic dependence on Beijing is forming.
They already use all our resources: gold, coal, oil, gas, everything. They are a global power, and we live on the shield.
And here, by the way, is where one of today's points of conflict between them ends. Well, because Putin absolutely hates this. Because Russia is losing its agency, Russia is losing its standing. And now, even to the naked eye, you can see the internal competition between Russia and China.
China is playing its own game. It continues to cooperate with Russia, but only on terms that are beneficial to itself, while at the same time maintaining a dialogue with the United States. In this arrangement, Beijing wins, while Putin gradually loses influence and opportunities. And what do you think about these changes? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button under the video, and stay up to date with the main news. There's more to come. See you in the next segment.